It's not often that we split a countdown into 2 videos. There are always some entries that make difficult cuts, but we were disregarding so many games that we dearly love when preparing to judge the best NES games ever that we had to turn the dial up to 20. You can sense the greatness of this console when you look at this list of incredible games that weren't incredible enough to crack the top 10. They gave us the greatest satisfaction in an incredibly diverse library of titles that changed the industry forever. Platformers are going to make up a lot of both parts of this list, but none of them play like BIONIC Commando. Protagonist Lad Spencer can navigate the environment with his trusty grappling hook, swinging over gaps and zipping up to different levels before guards even know he's there. And it's not just different for the sake of standing out. The levels are laid out perfectly to accommodate Lad's unusual method of traversal. Level progression is also unconventional, allowing Lance to choose where he gets deployed while dodging helicopter strikes. If you've grown up in an era where Match 3 games dominate the mobile market, you might not understand what makes Tetris so great. But in the 80s, there was simply nothing else like it, although it was quickly imitated. This was one of the first games that you'd wake up to in the middle of the night, bleary-eyed in disbelief at the sight of your mom playing your NES, utterly absorbed with the falling blocks. The simplicity, addiction, and satisfaction that Tetris brings to puzzle games is still hard to match. It's lower on our list simply because the NES wasn't the only place you could find it, even though Nintendo's version was a huge part of its explosive success. It's easy now to take this for granted, but Kirby's Adventure is a game in which the main character can fly anywhere, suck in enemies, swallow them, or shoot them back out as a projectile. And you know what? Some of those swallowed enemies give Kirby kick-ass special powers. We're talking lasers, UFOs, pile drivers, microphones that kill everything, parasols. The scope of this game is mind-boggling. Kirby's Adventure also has the advantage of releasing late into the NES's lifespan, so even today, it's unnaturally beautiful. Are you a fan of tales of daring do? Of solving mysteries and rewriting history? Chances are you're either an anthropomorphic duck or a fan of 1989's DuckTales. Playing as Scrooge McDuck, the richest duck in the world, our lust for treasure figuratively propels us forward, while our comrade Launchpad McQuack does so quite literally. To this day, the gameplay remains as tight as ever as we cane and bounce our way through African mines, the Amazon, the Himalayas, and Transylvania, before tackling arguably one of the best scored moon levels ever. Even contemporary games like Shovel Knight find inspiration in DuckTales, proving why this gem is one of the NES's greatest treasures. The NES has many challenging games, but Ghosts and Goblins is often regarded as one of the most difficult games ever released. Players control Sir Arthur as he attempts to rescue Princess Prin Prin from Satan, King of Demon World, while battling a slew of demonic creatures along the way. Different weapons littered throughout the stages allow for different playstyles. While hordes of enemies and difficult platforming sections can seem overwhelming, it rarely feels cheap, aside from not being able to move Arthur in midair and the infamous troll that sends you back to stage 5. Ghosts and Goblins is difficult in the best way, making it stand out in an era of side-scrolling excellence. Metroid is a cold, dark, and lonely game. It's just you, some hostile life forms, and a very claustrophobic environment. As bounty hunter Samus Aran, you're sent to the planet Zebes to recover the parasitic Metroid organisms that were stolen by space pirates. Through upgrading her armor, she's able to explore more of the planet, which is now its own genre. The Solitude soundtrack and methods of exploration in Metroid were unheard of in the 80s. It shows a game can make you feel isolated, yet still propel you to keep moving forward. It's easy to appreciate the original Final Fantasy because of the legacy it spawned. The classic title is responsible for one of the biggest RPG franchises of all time, featuring legendary characters and moments. Yet even without the history, Final Fantasy is an impressive game in its own right, with a customizable party, huge world, and outstanding soundtrack. The story, while not as elaborate as those in later Final Fantasies, has a few surprising and creative elements not commonly seen at the time. Plus, the game was the first in the series to have airships. Freeing yourself from random battles and soaring through the skies is still a stirring event. final game of the NES trilogy, Castlevania 3 serves as a prequel to the original. You play as Trevor Belmont, ancestor of Simon Belmont. Much of the game takes place outside of the castle walls in murky marshes, village streets, and even a ghost ship serving as playgrounds to the monsters under Dracula's command. For the first time in the series, players can find 3 extra playable characters with unique abilities, including Alucard, who can shoot fireballs and turn into a bat. Some consider Castlevania 3 the hardest Castlevania on the system, and its addictive gameplay will keep us coming back for years and years. Clearly inspired by sci-fi and action movies of the era, Contra offers some of the best white-knuckle action on the NES. There's nothing like gunning down legions of enemy soldiers and jumping over exploding bridges while a thunderous soundtrack plays in the background. Each boss fight requires quick reflexes and smart use of the various power-ups. The game is also best played in co-op, since having another gun to cover your back is an invaluable resource. And who could forget that Contra has the most famous implementation of the Konami code, allowing players to actually finish the game. The Adventure of Link is often a point of contention between Zelda fans, but look closely and you can see the true progenitor to the modern 3D Zelda games we all know and love. Coming off the top-down view of The Legend of Zelda, the second title on the NES takes a side-scrolling view, adding platforming elements and much more satisfying combat. RPG elements like leveling up and discovering useful spells are essential, as the game is one of the few Zelda games that remains incredibly challenging, even after knowing how to beat it. While not having a Ganon fight is a disappointment, we'll never forget our first grueling battle with Dark Link. Kyle Bossman learns a little bit about life and games while playing Super Mario Maker in the latest Final Bossman. And you can get an update on all the big and small titles coming your way next month in our recap of the games of October. We'll see you next week for the conclusion to our top 20 NES games.